Welcome to Whatif tutorials. In this tutorial I'll be looking at activity costing of materials in the project costing module. Firstly, we'll be looking at cost drivers, that is, those variables in an activity which drive the usage of materials. Next, we'll be looking at the use of stock items, that is, items of material which exist in the costing module in the item master file. Next, we'll be looking at the creation and usage of configured items, that is, items which are configured from the costing module to the specifications required in an activity. We'll be then looking at value-only items, which are items that do not exist in the costing module and are accounted for in terms of value only and created specifically in the project costing module for use in activities. And lastly, we'll be looking at the analysis of material costs within and across activities in a project. So first of all, let's go to our projects master file. We'll use this particular existing project here, and for that project we now go into our activities screen, and here we see the existing activities. There are two types: header activity and detail activity. Costs can only be incurred for detailed activities, and those costs then roll up to header and finally to the total activity in the project. First thing I want to talk about is cost drivers. So let's go to an activity, a detailed activity. Here we click cost drivers. First thing is that for every activity there is a default cost driver called job, and it has a quantity of 1. Now this is used where there are no real cost drivers involved in the estimation of quantities used. In some cases there's no way to relate the quantity used of a particular material to a driver. So that's the driver you have when you don't have a driver. Now other drivers can be created by selecting from your driver master file a particular predefined driver, and you can create new ones here as you go. Here's that, and the quantity here is the quantity of the driver that is applicable in this activity, this particular activity within the project. So there might be 20 floors, for example. Okay, so once you've created your drivers for a particular activity, you can then ready to proceed to apply materials. Now you can also copy drivers from existing activities. So you notice here that we've got, if I go down to floors with the one we just created, that was the first activity that applied to, but there are other drivers here like doors which have been applied to other activities with different quantities. So you can actually copy one of these. So we'll say windows, use, and we'll say that the quantity is 12. So, okay, so it's possible to, without actually creating the driver, to actually copy it from another activity. So that's our drivers for this particular activity. Close that. Now let's say we want to add some materials. We click our bill of materials, and we see here each item that's previously been added to our bill of materials for this activity. We'll now add a master item. Now configured items we'll deal with shortly, and value items also, but we are now adding an item from the item master file, that is an item in the costing module. We have only 2 items here in this particular factory, so we'll use one of those. Here we have the item, the description, category. Now you can define the use of this item by sections. you can add sections, whatever this section might be. All this is doing is providing some tracking of where this item is used. So we're now saying that this particular item is being used in the so-and-so section 1 section. You don't have to add anything in there at all, that's optional. Now, as I said earlier, the driver code by default is job and the quantity is 1, but we did add some drivers, so we can click in here, select the driver we want. In this particular case, let's say floors, and we'll say the usage per floor is 20. So that gives us our total usage of 400, and we can add some waste in here. And this section below here, this shows how the materials cost is generated for this item. It's a purchased item, and we're saying here now this is at the moment as per standard, and we can now further refine the price at which we're going to be using this item if it's indeed not going to be the standard item. We can put in here 100, maybe a discount, and we're putting it in Australian dollars because that supplier is Australian dollars, and we might have some further costs involved in landing that item or getting it ready. So we're down to a total cost of 92, which gives us, for our 400 units, $38,600. Now the final thing here is a timeline. The activity has a start and a finish, and by default the operation is said to be within that time frame, but you could, if you wished, actually change these dates for this particular operation if you want to get down to that level of detail. Okay, so now we've added a stock item into our bill of materials for this activity. Next, we want to look at adding a configured item. Now, configured items are items from your costing module which can be configured to customer requirements, and usually in terms of dimensions, which drive formulas to produce different quantities of usage. So we're now talking about items in the Stockmaster file that have been identified as configured. So the first thing to do for an activity is to create configured items. Now we've already created several here, so very briefly, to create a configured item, we selected from our item master file. These are all the configured items. We use it. We then specify it. We have on this side the specifications in terms of description and classifications, but more importantly we want to go into dimensions. So we have here the dimensions that's come from the item master, but we want to change these dimensions, so we specify, maybe change that to 4,000 in that length, and okay, we'll leave it at that, and okay. So we've now added a configured item. This particular item is the same item that's been used before in different dimensions, and we're now saying it's 4,000 by 200. Okay, so we've added that item to our configured items list. That's done. So we can now go back into, oops, I went too far. We can now go back into our activity, bill of materials, and we can find and we can add a configured item. So we've just added this item, so we'll take it and add it in whatever quantity we want. Now once again, you can use the configured item using your driver quantity. Select the driver and use that. At this stage we'll just say we know the quantity we're going to use without reference to a driver, so we'll put in 2 there. And so we've now used 2 of those configured items. So that's how you add a configured item. We've added first of all a stock item, and then we added a configured item. Finally, you can add value items, that is, items which have nothing to do with the costing module. They are simply various elements of material cost. So for example, we can here add, we can create another materials whatever we want to call it. That's a code, so we'll call that, say, maybe M1, then materials for use, whatever. And we can give it a long description. We need to select from our item categories because everything is categorized. And okay, we've created that now. We can now use that M1 in our bill of materials. Once before, we can use it in an existing section or add a section. We specify the supplier in this case because we need to know where we're getting it from, and the material cost. It might be 5,000. Once again, we have the timeline here, the activity and the operation. If you want to change the operation from the timeline of the operation from the activity, you can do it here. Okay, then you've also got for this item a long description. So you can specify a lot of detail about this value only item that you're using. Okay, so we've now added the third type of material, the value only item. In any case, they all get added to the bill of materials, and here we now have a total material cost of 1.4 million, and that now comes over to this activities materials cost, and you'll notice the target sales figure has been generated using the project's default markups. So there we have the materials. To add them to an activity cost. Finally, let me draw your attention to the analysis of materials. With materials, if you want to look into the material usage in a project, you can do it by going into each activity and drilling down. But if you need to have a look at where you're using materials across activities, then the project analysis is where you do it. So what you see here is all the materials that have been used in the project. Okay, so there's 8 million there, and we are able to select from all these materials using various criteria, and having selected the materials, we can, for example, what's an example? Made items, we can say, yeah, well, they're the made items, and the total of made items is 8.3. We might select supplier, select that supplier. There's no match found for that supplier, and so on. So you can select all your items that you want and get a total of those items, and then you can do a series of reports. Now these reports include the ability to run reports by date so that you can see where the materials are being spent on a date basis. So I won't run that at the moment, but that is very informative in terms of when the material costs are going to be incurred across the activity, across the project. Okay, so that's concluding this tutorial on adding materials to activities.